UN-backed human rights experts say the treatment of Ukrainian prisoners of war by their Russian jailers could amount to war crimes. The Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine says it has new evidence of horrific torture of Ukrainian prisoners, citing incidents of assault and sexual violence against women. It says in a report that human rights violations have been widespread since Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his troops to invade the country more than 2 years ago. Joining us now is Pablo DeGreiff, Commissioner in the UN Inquiry on Ukraine. Commissioner, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for your interest, Julie.
The report cites that Russian use of torture is widespread and systemic. Can you elaborate on that in terms of the size of scope of how torture is being used against Ukrainian POWs being held by Russian forces?
So this is a really tragic situation. In fact, the Commission carried out investigation in 11 detention facilities in 4 provinces in Ukraine and 3 provinces in the Russian Federation. And it examined the treatment of prisoners of war during their detention, which lasted up to 15 months. It determined that the use of torture, in addition to the confinement conditions, which were in themselves inhumane and that constituted mistreatment, that the use of torture was pervasive, that prisoners were tortured everywhere, frequently, without any consideration for their dignity or their well-being, without consideration for their health, and that the use of torture was both geographically widespread, but also systematic in the sense that the methods were uniform throughout the detention centers that it investigated. And those methods were grotesque. We don't use strong language frequently, but we, in this case, say in the report that the treatment of prisoners of war was horrific.
And does this also apply to civilians also being held by Russian forces?
Yes, during the first mandate, during the first year of investigations, the Commission had investigated torture against civilians in 7 different provinces, some in Ukraine and some in the Russian Federation. Civilians were also subjected to torture, and also in a widespread and systematic fashion. So there was really no way out.
And how did this report come to the conclusion?
So we were able to interview people that were that had the misfortune of going through that type of treatment. And the Commission uses the criterion of reasonable grounds to believe. So it's, although it's not the same criterion as a criminal tribunal, it is a very high standard of proof. Evidence has to be corroborated. It has to be corroborated by people who either witnessed or were present during the acts in question, or that coincide in their account of the methods. So we had plenty of opportunity to corroborate our conclusions. And again, I want to emphasize from people that were detained in very different places, both in Ukraine and in the Russian Federation, and that gave us exactly the same account, even of the names of the methods of torture that they were subjected to.
And most importantly, what are the next steps in regards to holding those responsible to account? Will charges be put forward with the International Court? We have about 30 seconds.
So the commission accumulates the evidence, gets consent from victims in order to share their evidence with judicial mechanisms. It has already received a request from a judicial system to carry out investigations, and the evidence will be stored and archived for use in future judicial procedures.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Julie. The case is important.